Now, the financial services industry has been cutting jobs since last summer, and by some estimates, 300,000 jobs in this sector from banks and other financial companies are going to be lost. Now, just a few months ago, these were considered pretty cushy, safe, white-collar jobs. Now they're getting the axe. The official unemployment level, rather, which is kept artificially low by changes over the last few years in how the data is reported, is now at 6.1%, which is the highest it's been, again, since September 2001. And when you count the long-term unemployed and the underemployed, the real figure is actually a lot higher. In September alone, 159,000 jobs were lost. That means that throughout the year so far, 760,000 jobs have been lost this year. But when you consider that the economy has to add about 150,000 jobs per month just to keep up with the growing workforce, the picture's way worse. According to Nigel Galt, who's the chief domestic economist at Global Insight, he says, quote, "My view is that unemployment will be near 8 or 8.5% by the end of the year." That's just in the next couple of months. So that, if it were to get that high, that would be the highest unemployment rate since the recession in the early 1980s. So it's been a long time since Americans have had to deal with that kind of unemployment, that kind of poverty, that kind of factory closures, even though throughout the entire boom that was happening. I mean, a lot of people called it a joyless boom or a jobless boom because it really didn't improve the lives of the average person. And now, over the last couple of days, the Federal Reserve has announced that they're going to cut interest rates, or they have cut interest rates yet again, which will encourage more borrowing, more spending beyond individuals' and companies' means, and therefore lead to even higher inflation. Now, gas prices have fallen since the summer, and I'm sure everybody's happy about that. But nonetheless, the damage has been done as far as affecting ordinary people. One company alone, ExxonMobil, pocketed $40 billion in profits last year alone. That's just one company in 1 year. That's billions of dollars that people like you and me don't have to buy food, to buy health care, to pay for our kids' education, for housing, whatever. So up until now, the economists haven't wanted to commit one way or another as to whether the economy has technically gone into a recession or not. But as of this morning, it seems that this is now pretty well confirmed and accepted by a lot of economists. And it also seems likely that it's not going to be a short downturn. Like the last recession was in 2001, it didn't really last very long. U.S. consumers have now cut back on spending. And remember, U.S. consumer spending accounts for 70% of the economy. They've cut down on spending by the largest amount in 28 years. Gross domestic product, which is the main measure of a country's economic health, shrank by 0.3% in July, August, and September. That's the worst, again, since the same period in 2001. The Conference Board, which has this consumer confidence index, their latest survey shows that the index fell to 38 in October, down from 61.4 in September. This is the steepest drop in consumer confidence since 1973, and the lowest level since 1967 when they started tracking the sentiment. So to put things into perspective, a year ago the index was at 95.2. Now it's at 38. I mean, that's pretty astonishing. And so after being told for years that there's no money for schools, there's no money for healthcare, for jobs, or to rebuild the Gulf Coast, or to rebuild our infrastructure, to build bridges, and that the only money that they had available was for the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, within days the government has now jumped to bail out the very same speculators who sparked this crisis in the first place. After decades of fighting against government regulation and government interference, they had to come begging for handouts to save their system. So much for the invisible hand of the market, huh? Or as one commentator put it, and I thought this was pretty funny, the invisible hand of the market is now reaching into the average worker's pocket to take money from them. The government, and now this is both Democrats and Republicans, have now approved a $700 billion bailout. But they've approved the money, but they haven't exactly said how it's going to be spent. Nobody knows how this money is going to be spent. So while the bankers on Wall Street continue to make millions in bonuses, and I think people will have heard about the CEOs at this company AIG, who as soon as they got billions of dollars, I guess, in a bailout, they went to a nice spa resort in California and then asked for more money after that. Well, they keep doing that, and while billions are spent every month on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, again, millions and millions of ordinary Americans, working people, are losing their jobs, their homes, their retirement, and frankly, their hopes. And the scariest thing for us, for everybody, is that for years, although people might have thought that something wasn't quite right, people kept hoping that things would get better. But now people are realizing that this was the good times. This was the best. This was as good as it gets under capitalism. That was the boom. And even during the boom, like we said, the gap between the rich and poor continued to grow. So for a time, people in the United States could comfort themselves, or some people in the United States at least, that here it was different. Sure, billions of people around the world lived in a hellish nightmare of poverty and war, but here we were more or less getting along okay. But the fact is that the last 30 years were the exception, not the rule under capitalism. And only in places like the US, Canada, Western Europe, and Japan was the quality of life actually somewhat tolerable. Now the whole world has entered a period of war, of crisis, of terrorism, of revolution, and of counter-revolution. And I'm not trying to be pessimistic or alarmist. This is simply the reality of the situation. Most importantly, from my point of view, is that all of this is having a profound effect on the consciousness of millions and millions of people. And it's only the beginning of the beginning. And this is why there's been, again, a revival in the ideas, interest in the ideas of socialism. From John McCain to Obama to Palin, Biden, even Joe the plumber, the Wall Street Journal, whose name is not really Joe, apparently. They're all talking about socialism. They're talking about Marx and the Wall Street Journal and The Economist, and everybody's asking the question, was Marx right? In Germany, for example, where Karl Marx was born, Capital is now, his book Capital, that explains the workings of the capitalist system, is now back on the bestseller list. So this question, was Marx right? Well, in my opinion, the answer is pretty straightforward. Of course, I'm biased, but yes, on all the fundamental points, he was right. He explained that all this was going to happen. Because at root, what we're seeing are symptoms of a crisis of the capitalist system, which is rotten to its foundations. And it's not just Marxists or other crazy people that are saying this. This is a fact that's recognized by the serious strategists of big business. For example, maybe you've heard of the Financial Times. It's a pretty important newspaper, kind of like the Wall Street Journal. This guy, Martin Wolf, who writes for the Financial Times, he had the following to say. It's a fairly long quote, but I think it's worth reading. So he said, quote, "The idea that a quick recession would purge the world of past excesses is ludicrous. The danger is, instead of a slump, as a mountain of private debt in the U.S. equal to 3 times GDP topples over into mass bankruptcy. The downward spiral would begin with further delay of financial systems and proceed via pervasive mistrust, the vanishing of credit, closure of vast numbers of businesses, soaring unemployment, tumbling commodity prices, cascading declines in asset prices, and soaring repossessions. Globalization would spread the catastrophe everywhere. This would be a recipe for xenophobia, nationalism, and revolution. Everything must be done to prevent the inescapable recession from turning into something worse. Deflation is a real danger. At stake could be the legitimacy of the open market economy itself. The danger remains huge and time is short." Again, this is not some wacky socialist. This is one of the most respected analysts and defenders of the system, calling on the system itself to try and save itself. So what do we in the Workers' International League think about all this? Well, we think, first of all, that the bosses should have to pay for this crisis. The working class shouldn't have to pay for the corruption and irrationality of the capitalists and their system. Despite the decades of prejudices that have been built up against the ideas of Marxism and of socialism in general, people are increasingly open to this because they're seeing in practice that capitalism doesn't work. A lot of people say to me, oh, well, socialism sounds good on paper, but it can't work in practice. Well, you could say the exact same thing for capitalism right now. It sounds nice in The Economist magazine and in Adam Smith's writings, but in practice it's not doing what a social system should do, which is to develop the economy in order to improve people's quality of life.